Some records have been broken, not the kind of records that Rachel Reeves would like to hear talk about, because we're talking here about the rate of government borrowing. So just how high are the interest rates that this government is having to pay? This chart goes all the way back to the 1990s, and what you can probably just about make out is, look, that's the 10-year borrowing rate, the 10-year gilt yield, and it is up to the highest level since 2008. And actually, if you look at even longer-term borrowing rates, so if the government wants to borrow for 30 years, look at the yield on that. That's even higher. And actually, it's at the highest rate since 1998. So we're going back even further through history there. And when this gets higher, often it's a sign that investors out there in the market are worried about how much you're borrowing. Sometimes it means they're expecting more growth. But in this case, given growth forecasts have actually been cut, it looks like they are concerned about extra borrowing in the UK. And given the level is actually higher now than it was after the mini-budget, so in 2022, a lot of people are asking that question, you know, are we in a worse place than we were in 2022? Well, we can actually test that, OK, because there's a couple of things you can look at. You can look at whether this is happening alongside a fall in the pound. If that were happening, it would mean it's kind of a sign that people are pulling money out of the economy. And if you look at the pound, let's just get a kind of chart of the pound. This is showing you the pound versus various other countries, other currencies around the world. So the higher that is, the stronger the pound is. Look at 2022. You can see that got down to the lowest level. The pound got down to the weakest level in modern history, actually, record level against the dollar, whereas now the pound is considerably stronger. It has come down a little bit in the last few days, and there's definitely concern about what President Trump and tariffs might mean for the UK and for Europe. But it's pretty high compared with then. So on that test, it doesn't look as bad now as it was in 2022. Another test you could do is to ask the question, so this is back to that last chart you saw a moment ago about those gilt yields. Are we alone? Are we the only country in the world that are facing these higher borrowing costs? And if you bring on, for instance, the US and Germany, Germany's not come up as much, but it has come up, and the US is basically in lockstep with the UK. So everyone's borrowing costs are getting more. And that's not the case, that wasn't the case back in 2022. And one way of showing you this is basically what we're doing is we're taking the same data and showing how much the UK has deviated from other countries like the US and Germany in previous post-budget periods. So this is your kind of safe range of where UK debt has traded after a budget. And what I can do is I can bring on where this latest budget from Rachel Reeves was. And you can see there definitely was a moment just after the budget. Last few days, most recent few days after the budget, do you remember we were on TV saying, listen, some of these borrowing costs are going up. It's a bit worrying for the Chancellor. But what you can then make out is, look, this line then goes down and it stays within the safe zone. So that's the Rachel Reeves budget. Compare that now with what happened in 2022. A totally different story. UK borrowing costs going way higher than German, than American costs. And it was only really when Kwasi Kwarteng resigned that they went down to more or less normal levels. And actually, that line only ends there because Liz Truss resigned at that point. She didn't even get further along the line than that. Final thing to say, though. So, I mean, we've kind of established this isn't the same as 2022, but it is concerning for the Chancellor. First, because people are worried about higher debt. Secondly, because she has these fiscal rules, and she only has a certain amount of headroom before she starts breaking those rules. And the more you're having to borrow, the less headroom you have. This is showing how much headroom the Chancellor had against her fiscal rules before she made all those budget measures, so borrowing extra money to invest. After the budget measures, she had about £10 billion, £9.9 billion. Well, if you take account of the fact that she's going to be paying more in debt interest because of that first chart I showed, look at what happens to that bar. It goes down to just £1 billion. So she's really close to breaking her fiscal rules. That's definitely something to be concerned about. But no, this is not quite or even anything like what we saw in 2022.